welcome back to CrossTalk, a cross-table discussion about cross-type topics. I am Sam O'Banion, this is Nick Pannone, and we are in Galatians 1, 6 through 24.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big one.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I think we should probably just jump in.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so whose turn is it to read? Is it me? Did you read?
I think I read last time.
Did you do that on purpose so that I had to read a big old chunk of this?
Sure,
All
we
right.
can say that.
Let's do this. Oh, there's the squeak. All right, let's read. We're reading 6 through 24, so this is the rest of chapter 1. So bear with me as we go. Paul continues, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached to me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born and who had called me by his grace was pleased to reveal his Son to me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. And when I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only were hearing it said, he who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy, and they glorified God because of me.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, lots of stuff going on here.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So, I want to address one thing before we dive into all this stuff here. Because if you were with us in Ephesians, you've heard us talk about this quite a bit. But if you're new with us in Galatians, I want to make sure that we address this because it's important for us to remember that we are reading a letter. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so there are things about a letter that inform how we understand what's in the letter.
Yeah. Okay,
and I want to point out a technique that Paul uses in almost all of his letters to help us understand what we're looking at. Mm-hmm. So we addressed this in the last session a little bit, but when we talked about the greeting and how, especially in the first century Greco-Roman world, the epistle or the letter has some main parts to it here, right? My favorite was I found one that said the way that a Greco-Roman letter was structured is it had a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah.
True?
Yeah.
So in the beginning of this, we get an opening, right? Mm-hmm. And in the opening, like what you're putting here, a typical letter will address the author or the sender, right? Will address the recipient or identify the recipient, and a salutation or a greeting of some kind, okay? This is how it's broken up for us. This is how we broke this up. Yeah. Well, we get to the body of the letter, and the body gets a little hectic because Paul does some funky things with it sometimes, all within the realms of the body, all within the realms of a formal letter.
Yes, and typically, especially even Pauline literature, it goes to Thanksgiving.
This is awesome because my notes here say that a typical letter will have a prayer, a wish, or some type of thanksgiving, right? Or if you broaden it out besides the Bible, you get an address to the gods or the goddesses. Yeah. So
some level of
absolute
praise or thanksgiving, or some would even call it a doxology of sorts.
Right, and that thanksgiving usually points us to what the letter's about.
Yes.
Okay, so in the body of the letter, we have a very common rhetorical technique that Paul uses almost all the time, and it's called it's a thing called inclusio. All right, so I have some. I looked this up so that it's not just. We don't just think we're giving Nick's opinion on this. But inclusio is a rhetorical device. Another name for it is the concentric principle. All right. It's also known as bracketing or envelope structure. And essentially, it's a framed work that at the beginning and at the end, it tells you what that section or what that letter is about.
And again, if you watched Ephesians, you know that you can fold it up.
If you fold it
like
up, yeah. So if you took Galatians and you folded it, and the conclusion and the opening would hit each other, and then look what's right before the conclusion, what's right after the opening, and see where they hit, and it tells you what it is that we're reading, the main theme of the letter, why it is the author wrote this. Now, the purposes of this, and this to me is kind of important for us to understand. Again, this isn't something you and I made up.
Yeah.
So the purpose, it's a twofold purpose. One, it's structural, right? It alerts the reader to the important theme. I like this. In classes, I always call it a bookend. Look at the bookends, and then you can see what it was that Paul was talking about. It alerts us to this. So what's said at the very beginning, what's said at the very end, and you can also do this within sections of the letter. Sometimes that works out real nicely for us, like a big origami thing that folds really nicely. Well, the second the second fold of this is functional. There's a functional purpose. It demonstrates how the material within the inclusio relates to the inclusio itself. All right, so Paul tells us what it is that he's writing about, and at the end he tells us what he wrote about, and in the middle it tells us about what he wrote about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I say all that because we are at the beginning, and this beginning is telling us exactly what this letter is about. Then at the conclusion, we get some formal things too. We get some final remarks, typically personal greetings, and maybe a couple things, just, hey, heads up, this is some practical things coming up. Yeah. So anyway, we get to this large section of Galatians. We are told immediately. Matter of fact, we don't get a Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Which I actually can talk about for a
Go
second
for it.
if you want.
Please do.
Because I found a couple people that argued that, because the argument is Paul was so angry that he skipped the Thanksgiving. And I think I even said that last week. I said, yeah, it seems like he's so fired up he wants to get right into it. A couple people, I found a couple articles that talked about how there is a epistolary structure where you actually skip Thanksgiving and you go right into, they didn't call it anything, they just said it's the use of the word that Paul uses here. I gotta remember how to write it. Thaumazo.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
My Greek writing is turning into English. And basically, it's the I am astonished. It's used as I am perplexed. Or some level of that. And the argument was that this word is loaded with emotion to put an impetus not only on the writer but the recipient.
Yeah.
And so there's a purpose for skipping Thanksgiving. It's because it's this emotional plea.
And it's done for effect.
Yeah, it's done for, exactly. It's like, and we find this in ancient papyri all over the place. Instead of going to Thanksgiving, we go to thaumazo. I am confused, and I am putting, the argument was, from some, not all, that this wasn't anger. This was, I am pleading with you from the depths of my heart. Like, I know you. Like,
right.
I want you to follow Jesus. And so it's not, I am angrily astonished. It is, I am pleading with you. I'm surprised because I know, like, I love you.
And if anger is there, again, it's for effect. It's if all we ever did was yell at our kids, okay, their response to us would not be, let's do whatever we can to not get yelled at. Their response is, whatever we do, we're gonna get yelled at. So they just tune you out, and it's just they just look at you until you're done yelling. The objective is just to survive the anger.
Yeah.
Right. That's not what Paul does here. I think it's not that he's not thankful for them. I think as we read the rest of the letter, he wouldn't spend so much time if he didn't believe and wasn't thankful for them. I think the effect is I want to shock you into what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
I would also argue that, to my knowledge, we don't have I argued that this is his first letter that he wrote to churches. You argued pretty close to the first. Okay?
Yeah.
Pretty close. So I'd still say he's pretty young too. And so formalities is not maybe there yet. Maybe he hasn't refined his letter writing yet.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the main reason why the thaumazo is purposed here. I think it's for effect. It's to grab attention. It's the coach yelling at me in a silent locker room.
Yeah.
Not because the coach is mad at me. Matter of fact, most of the time when the coach is yelling at me, it means he's got something for me. He expects something from me, and he's not done with me.
I was it's a different kind of Thanksgiving. Like you can like, I don't know, when I think of like Thanksgiving is a gracious thing that you do, this is a different kind of grace.
Yeah.
This is like hard grace.
Absolutely.
Here's what you need to understand.
Yeah, the hard love here. And so he jumps in right away. I'm astonished, right? The thaumazo. So it's Paul shocked that they're leaving or they're turning to a different gospel. The word turn I found to be very interesting. Right? It's this word, a lot of his words in this section, by the way, start with meta. Okay? Metatithemi, something like that. And when it was used in older writings, it actually meant to depart your way of life or apostasy.
And I believe it's even used militaristically to mean like deserter.
Yes.
One who deserts his post.
We were this, and now we're this, because it's this pivot. It's not just a changing of mind or considering something else. It's a departure.
Yeah, like fleeing almost. Like we're completely turning our back.
Correct. So we look at that and we go, okay, what is it that they're turning from? Right? Well, they're turning from the gospel, and the gospel in which Paul brought was a gospel of grace. It's a departure of the forgiveness of sins. Yeah. In order to go to a different gospel. Now, I say that because we're only in verse 6. Right? Okay. One more clarifying thing in there is this word called in verse 6. This, again, inclusio. All right? So part of how we tell what's in the inclusio part, the folded part, the envelope part, is a lot of times the hints are repeated words.
Yeah.
Okay? So called is one of Paul's favorite words to use. Right? So this gospel to which you were called, there's all kinds of academic, scholarly argument about the nature of the called. Right? Is this Paul calling them to the gospel? Is this God calling them to the gospel? And if he's calling them to the gospel, does that mean he doesn't call other people to the gospel? And all this stuff. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, and we don't have the time to dive into this. The gospel is to be preached to all, and there are some that get reached by it, right? And called, I think, should be connected to reached.
Yeah.
All right. So, but it's going to show up because he's going to get into, as we already heard when we read this, into his own story, and he talks about that this is how he was called. Not just called to Jesus, but called to a particular and specific mission.
Yeah.
All right.
For sure.
So the word there for called, this specific one is kalesantos. All right. Kaleo is kind of the root of this. And so if you were able to read this in the Greek, you see it's glaring at us. That root, the kale right there, shows up over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And again, a rhetorical device I think that Paul's doing. Okay.
And Paul does all the time.
Paul does all the time. Actually, the group of words that the kale words is some of his favorite to use. So it shows up not just here, but in a lot of his letters. All right. So he continues through this in 7 and 8. He actually clarifies what it was that they turned to and turned from. Right? And in 7, he reminds us, honestly, the gospel you turn from to go to another gospel, there's really no other gospel.
Yeah, and I think I think it was the New Living Translation I was reading this. They do a really good job they change the word gospel to good news. And so because what he's saying here is not that there's other good news. Like you're not turning from good news to good news. You're going from good news to not good news.
Correct.
There's not. And so, I think that's a good way to read it if you're, because when you read different gospel, you think, was there a different, like, somebody wrote a different Mark or somebody has a different Christ?
Yeah.
It's more really like, no, there is good news. Like, I have good news for you, and you're deciding to go with bad news.
Yeah,
Why?
with not good news.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or the good news. And then when he even gets into 8 or 7 and 8 here, he's talking about those that are troubling them. Mm-hmm. So trouble. As you study this, you need to go, okay, what's the trouble then? Mm-hmm. Like that doesn't. If someone agrees with you, how's that troubling, right? But the trouble they're causing is that they are causing the Galatians to doubt the original good news that they heard. Mm-hmm. Now, I bring this up, and I'm sure this works for you too. The pastor lights go off, and you hear these all kinds of the warning that's going on right here.
Yeah.
How many times have we worked with somebody in a pastoral relationship that no matter how much we've confirmed what it is that we believe, mm-hmm. that there all of a sudden some sneaks in, some kind of life experience happens, some kind of emergency happens, and it causes this doubt to rise up to a point where we're abandoning ship.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. And I don't think God is necessarily opposed to doubts or questions.
Yeah.
Okay? Thomas confirms that for us.
Well, a lot of people confirm that for us.
You and I confirm that,
yeah,
right?
A lot of biblical characters.
Yeah, exactly. It's this doubt that, hey, what you heard from someone, particularly Paul here, mm-hmm. Who heard it from the lion's mouth, is not exactly right. Paul's omitting something, mm-hmm. right? So in the ESV, we have this, the word that's used here is distort, and they want to distort the gospel of Christ. Another word could be alter, mm-hmm. okay? Another meta word, right? Metasrepsai.
Yeah.
Fun word.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of basically, not exclusively, but a lot of Greek meta words are always in the negative. So this is just to really hit home, thaumazo, things are bad. There's bad news out there.
And a lot of times when you see any Greek word that starts with meta, you got to start thinking, okay, there's some kind of hyperbole getting ready to happen, which happens in verse 8, by the way. So he doesn't take long to ramp up to it. So metasrepsa. And that word, so when I hear distort or when I hear the word alter, sometimes I hear it's just like minor things, so maybe of opinion. It's a radical change.
Yeah.
Radical change.
That was me distorting.
It was really, really good. Yeah, it was a bending of the spoon, right? It is a radical change to a point that's not the gospel anymore. And mm-hmm. so, again, that's what he's saying. This metasrepsa, this is how we know it's not really the gospel. Mm-hmm. We can have differing opinions on certain things. There's room for that in good news.
Yeah.
There's room for that. But it leads them away from really the mission of Jesus. Mm-hmm. It's a radical change. And their radical change is, hey, the gospel Paul preached to you, he omitted something. Specifically, he omitted a submission to the Old Testament law, especially regarding circumcision, which we know this because we read later. Yeah, absolutely. He has some strong language for those that do that. What's the word he uses there?
I'm not sure.
It's accursed.
Oh, accursed. I thought you were talking about the Greek.
I have the Greek word if you want it.
I can't tell you the Greek word. I can tell you accursed.
Yes, I can tell you the Greek word. It's anathema.
Anathema.
Anathema, yes. And listen, when he says, I hope they're accursed, this is where, I look at this, and this is why I feel like going, okay, this is really young Paul, because I was this guy at one point, right, where you're ready to set the world on fire. Mm-hmm. You think we're going to get this all, and I see a little bit coming out here, but anathema is a final destruction and a final condemnation, right? He's not saying, I hope they just have a bad day and they realize from that bad day they turn around. Yeah, he's like,
darn you.
Exactly. It's not that at all. It's, I hope those that lead you astray like this end up in final destruction. Mm-hmm. I may not use that word now when I'm referring to those that are clearly opposed to the gospel. Yeah. Right? I may think more in terms of I hope we can win them over. Mm-hmm. Because it's really funny because Paul was that guy. Yeah. Which we read about in the rest of this section. Yeah. Exactly. I do want to point one thing out here too. The ones he says I hope are accursed. this is important for me. This may be a Nickism, but Paul's not writing to those who are altering or distorting the gospel. He's not writing to them. He's writing to those that have been persuaded by them. That's a huge clarification. Like, that's a huge distinction, in my opinion. I think sometimes we want to treat those that don't believe in the gospel as if we can correct their behavior, then we're good.
Yeah.
And Paul's not here to correct their behavior. He's here to correct those that already are in the fold.
Yeah, it's that kind of the different side of the same coin. That's a problem I see with evangelism, where it's like, if somebody is like, well, I believe in Islam, or I'm a Buddhist, people go, well, at least they believe in something, or some level of that.
Correct.
It's like, no, we still need to talk to these people. Like, just if they believe something else, that doesn't mean they're free from anything. Like, there's still bad news.
Honestly, and if they don't know Jesus as Savior, then it's not Paul saying, I hope they get accursed.
Yeah.
They already are.
Yeah.
Like, that's the trajectory of their life is already moving in that direction. The trajectory of my life prior to knowing Jesus was going that way, and it doesn't really matter how nice or kind I might have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not writing to them. Like, this isn't a letter to those that have taught the false gospel.
Yeah.
This is a letter to those that listen to them and follow their way.
And this might be a Samism, but that's one thing that I kind of looked at was, it's not, I hope he's accursed, like, make him accursed. It's let him be. And that, to me, is like, you need to, like, stop following them. Like, let him be accursed. You don't need to be in this. Yeah. So it's like,
it's not, he's going to be accursed. He's already in there. He's in the realm.
Again, Samism is like, you need not pray, like, you need not hope someone is accursed. Like, that is not an option.
Right.
You can, if somebody's trying to lead you astray, let them be accursed, but it's not your job to hope for them to be accursed.
And Paul sounds mean because he is the nice.
Yeah, sinking.
Paul sounds mean because he's the one that's pointing it out, right?
Yeah.
So this isn't a lack of love from Paul or a lack of extending grace.
Yeah,
okay?
And Paul would absolutely celebrate if they came back from their accursion.
We know this because he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know this because he did.
Soon.
9 and 10. Okay, so this is this to me. So it feels like this is Paul practicing the inclusio device. All right.
Okay.
Right here. So all right, just to show you, I'm going to repeat it. So you just fold 7, 8, 9, and 10 in half, and you see this like mini, teeny, tiny inclusio.
Yeah.
Really, really fast. So in case you didn't know what he was saying, let me tell you again. The gospel they're preaching is really not a gospel. It's leading you astray. You're moving toward their accursion.
Yeah. I think that's.
I don't know if it is right or not, but it also denotes the weight of their preaching, and it denotes the weight of his preaching too. 10 gives us a rhetorical question to show Paul's position.
Yeah, that's a sermon for modern times for me. That was the one I like. I just went, that's the sermon for the election season.
Sure.
Is the whole point of being elected is it's a popularity contest. Like, you're seeking the approval of man.
Sure.
It's like, that's not what we're here for.
No.
Like, that's not what we're doing. So anyway.
Okay, but it brings up some questions, which I think even get into verse 11 here, when he writes, "For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that I preached, that was preached by me, is not man's gospel." In other words, it didn't originate with human anything.
Yeah.
It has a divine origin. Okay, so we smash all these together, and we get this idea right here. In what way, as we read this so far, could Paul be confused with trying to please man?
Yeah, and
it's a weird question.
Yeah, but I think that is, again, I think we'll bump into this a couple times. I think for me this is like a kind of northern-southern argument, because I think Paul is like trying to reiterate who he truly is to a group of people that don't know him that well.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I start to read, especially this start of his story here, which we can get into in a second if you want to
Well,
go.
okay, so I have a little bit different angle
Yeah.
on this, okay? So I'm asking the question then, in what way can Paul be confused with pleasing man? And the only way that I see in here when we pit the gospel he preaches up against the one that they are falling for, the non-gospel that they're falling for, which is an inclusion of Old Testament law, specifically circumcision, right?
Yeah.
Is that Paul preaches grace, okay? And so often the message of grace is seen as a weak gospel. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Paul's being accused of. Well, Paul's just trying to please you by saying you don't have to do all of these laws.
Yeah.
You get to come in just by faith and just by God's grace.
Yeah.
Right? Therefore, everybody's happy. And I think that's what he's arguing against. It's like, this grace gospel didn't come from man. Like, I didn't invent this.
Yeah.
And if you need evidence of this, let me tell you who I used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Which he hits surprisingly long for.
A little bit.
Paul.
Again, I think he's practicing his inclusia.
Yeah.
Just bing, 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 hammering this away. So we get into 12 then, right? Just, hey, in case you're wondering where this came from, I did not receive this from any man, right? I didn't receive this from any man, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. Or I wasn't taught it. I received it from a revelation of Jesus Christ. So we have two kind of imperative words here. Received, perlambano, which to me sounds very Italian. Perlambano.
Gotta say it with your hands.
That's right. Perlambano. Now give me my meatball. And then revelation. Okay? Apocalypseos.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of syllables in there. I couldn't get to the stress. Okay. It's a revelation from Jesus Christ. So this is where we get to interact with the first kind of weird genitive. All right?
Yeah.
Which we ran into with Ephesians. We have a real long spiel about that if you want to go. It's one of our things. In
I couldn't tell you which one.
Okay. So the question here is this a genitive of objective or a genitive of subjective? All right? Is Jesus Christ the object of the revelation, or is he the subject of the revelation? This is one of my favorite answers to this, all right? Because this is the one time you can legitimately go, it's both.
Yeah. You can say yes.
Yes, you could say yes, and you're right. Right? You don't have to make an argument one way or the other. So he's saying that I received this not from any human being, but I received this directly from Jesus Christ, right? That Jesus, the subject, gives the revelation. And what's the revelation? Jesus, the object.
Yeah, it's from and of.
Yeah, from and of. Exactly right. And if you want a greater detail about that, look it up in Acts 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
But that's very interesting, right? So I learned the good news because someone taught it to me. Paul learned the good news because he directly received it from Jesus.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely critical, because if that's not true, not only is his argument in Galatians false, we have to rip out 2/3 of our New Testament.
For sure.
It does not qualify as biblical canon. Yeah. So, critical verse there, verse 12. All right?
Yep.
If you don't believe that, you are going to struggle with the rest of the Bible.
Yeah, most of it.
Yeah.
At least what we've been given.
Exactly.
New.
You're really, really struggling. All right, so it begins his story.
Yes.
His former way of life. All right? Verses 13 and 14, he talks about his former way of life. My favorite kind of phrase for this is one person said it's an epistolary disclosure formula.
Okay.
That sounds very official.
It does.
Basically, it's Paul talking about his own stuff. All right? Let me tell you where I'm from here. I received the gospel through a revelation given by Jesus, since only a revelation from God could possibly turn Paul away from his devotion to Judaism. Right?
Yeah.
Epistolary disclosure formula. Look, the only way I'm even talking about Jesus is because God revealed himself. Otherwise, I'd be promoting this altered gospel even harder than they are.
Yeah, and just the wording he uses to describe his former life, every time he describes his former life is just so intense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Paul is still a Jew by nationality, right? But he is no longer a part of Judaism, right? The ism is gone. He talks about, for you know my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church. we really don't have time to get into all of it.
Acts 8, 1 through 3. I wrote some of these down.
There you go. I've got a bunch of them too.
Yeah.
So you got some? Go ahead.
I just said how I persecuted the church. You can go straight to Acts 8, 1, and it's Saul ravages the church is the headline.
Right. You need to bump up back a little bit even.
Oh,
a
yeah.
little bit of 7.
Talk about Stephen and holding his coats.
Exactly. Acts 9, 1 through 2. Acts 9, 13 through 14. Acts 9, 21. Acts 22, 3 through 5. Acts 22, 19 through 20. Acts 26, 4 through 5. Acts 26, 9 through 11. Acts 26, 14 through 15.
Yeah, go through them as we go.
There you go.
So,
There you go. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. And there's some
Yeah.
other stuff too that he writes in other letters that refer to that. Okay, so that was his former life, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to point out for this is in 14, he was talking about advancing in Judaism. All right, so we know that he was a disciple of Gamaliel,
Yep.
or however you want to pronounce that name. I've heard it pronounced a million different ways.
I've only heard Gamaliel
Really,
my entire life.
Gamaliel, Gamaliel. I've heard that.
That second one I've heard maybe once or
Okay,
twice.
I always said Gamaliel.
Yeah.
All right. He shows up a couple different times, but Gamaliel actually demonstrates quite a bit of wisdom at the beginning of Acts. But he was very well known as a Pharisee. All right. Now we need to strip the negativity away from that. So Pharisees were very holy people.
Yeah.
All right. So they just had a zeal for the law, whereas I might say Christians ought to have a zeal for people. Okay, so that's how we contrast that. But he was advancing in that. He was very close to being one himself. That he was going to be given a space for authority in that. He would have his own disciples
Oh, yeah.
to disciple into Phariseeism, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he talks about that, and then he says, I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people, all right? So he was top of the class. Listen, so extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. Right. My former way of life, I was an absolute circumcision promoter.
Yeah.
Okay? I drove my car with the stickers and flags everywhere. You've got to be circumcised. You have to do this. You have to do this.
Yeah.
This is the right way to go about everything right here. He said, so if you think that the people you heard from really have zeal, listen, I believed that.
Yeah.
That was me.
I was the guy that would have been trying to change your mind.
Yeah.
That has distorted your gospel.
Exactly. So what could possibly change my mind from that? It has to be divine intervention. It's the only way. No human being could have this extreme zeal, right? No human being could move me off of that.
And I read a really good thing by N.T. Wright where he looked into that word zealous and that idea within ancient Pharisaical writing and how the word zeal would almost only be used to be stated in acts of violence for Judaism. So like
Correct.
Phineas in Numbers, Elijah in 1 Kings 18, I think, where he kills the Baals. Yeah. And I mean, Elijah even says, I have zeal for the Lord in the law. And so N.T. Wright made and I'll talk about this in a second more, but he makes a comparison to, well, this is what Paul is saying. Paul was saying, I was this zealous. And when he says zealous, that they would make that connection to, I was ready to kill people for this.
Exactly.
That's the zeal, the Phineas Elijah tradition of zeal. I'm prepared to murder for my faith.
I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Especially as he pits that up against, I've got 15 through 17 kind of lumped together with this because there's a big but in here. All right. We get to 15. But when he who had set me apart before I was born and who called me by his grace, there's our word called again. All right. So called kalesis or kalesis. In 15, who called me by his grace, then 16, was pleased to reveal his son to me, right? So here's the revelation. Again, not from human origin, but from divine origin. He was pleased to show this to me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles. So the zeal I had for Jews has now been redirected, and you know what, Saul at the time?
Yeah.
You're going to be Paul, and that zeal is now for humans.
Yes.
For people.
I was going to say, that's what, when you said that zeal for law versus zeal for people, that's exactly the
Yeah,
difference.
it's a huge difference for people. And he goes, and he clarifies this whole thing too. I did not immediately go to anyone. I didn't consult with anyone about this. It was me and God. It's just me and Jesus right now. And I think there's a preaching point in there that I think it's important and biblical to seek advice from other Christians, especially those who are older or have been in this longer than we have and have more experience, right? Elders is an important word. I think there's wisdom and Proverbs confirms this, there's wisdom in collecting different points of view, right? And the counsel is what it refers to. But there needs to be time when it is just you sitting down with Jesus. Is going, this is so drastic. I need to turn off every other voice. I need to turn off every other machine. I need to turn off every other message. What is it, God, you have for me? And it's just you and Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's making a point here. He's like, I didn't go consult with anyone. Not the people I was traveling with, even Barnabas. And it wasn't even him.
Yeah.
It was just me and Jesus. Just me and Jesus. And he gets this new ministry to the Gentiles. And it goes into effect immediately.
Yeah.
Right. Immediately. He says, I didn't consult with anyone. Then verse 17, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me. All right. So this is a big deal. At the time, this is their operating base.
Yeah.
Okay. Jerusalem, occasionally there would be stuff going up into Antioch of Syria. So I don't know how well they can see this. Jerusalem on this map is right here. To Antioch is up here.
Yeah.
All right. So this is all in Syria, Judea, Syria. So this was the operating base for the church, especially way back at the beginning. We're talking right after Jesus had ascended into heaven.
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't go here right away, is what he says. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus.
Arabia.
That's
Greek.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So he's... I don't think this is on our map here.
Arabia?
Yes, Arabia, but I was looking for Damascus.
Damascus would be, over this way.
Kind of this way, yeah.
It's not on there, which is weird.
It is weird. Okay, so people get all kinds of fuddled up about this timeline right here. So I want to clarify a couple things here. Paul was on his way to Damascus when Jesus appears to him, changes his life, right, and his eternal destiny. Okay, so takes up residence in Damascus. All right, from Damascus he goes down to Arabia, and then he says he returns again to Damascus. Right, so a lot of times in every other account we don't have the Arabian nature of the story. Don't let that throw you off. Okay, a lot of times we're talking about Damascus, we need to think about it in terms of DAD. Okay, is Damascus, Arabia, back to Damascus. All right, so don't let that get thrown off. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 32 and 33, he talks about an encounter he has with Aretas, the king or the governor of the Nabatea region or desert, depending on what you read, which is also
in that area.
In that area. And it makes it fit because at the time, King Aretas IV was the one who was ruling. All right? And so this fits really, really well. It shouldn't throw us off when we understand in broader terms.
Yeah.
So he's in here. Now, with that said, when people talk about Paul's time in the desert, what are they usually talking about?
I don't know if I've ever heard anybody talk about Paul's time in the desert.
I've always been taught that this was a time where he was learning all this stuff. Like this was a time for him, is basically his Bible college education.
Yeah.
When you start putting this all together, that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm sure he was learning stuff, but that wasn't the purpose. If we don't think he was preaching in the Arabian desert, we're fooling ourselves because of the encounter he has with King Aretas.
Yeah.
Right? So in 2 Corinthians 11:32 is really critical all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's really critical because it tells us something he was doing in that. He was immediately preaching. So he wasn't receiving counsel from anybody. Again, this makes our Galatians account true.
Yeah.
He wasn't he wasn't going off to it wasn't just this spiritual kind of, there were no plates that were handed to him.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yeah.
right? How about that?
Yeah.
So he wasn't given a revelation that no one knew about or couldn't witness. He took the revelation he had on his way to Damascus, decided this is truth, this is gospel, this is good news, and I'm saved.
Mm-hmm.
We were told about his baptism, and then he goes and he's preaching all along the way. In Acts 9:20, he preaches immediately. There's no reason to believe that he didn't preach when he was in the Arabian desert and then on his way back to Damascus.
Can I tell you a really fun argument I heard?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the argument I read from this article, and I think this was still N.T. Wright's article, he said that Paul, within his heart, recognized a familiar story to himself in Elijah in 1 Kings.
Okay.
So he said, understanding he was like 1 Kings 18 Elijah, who was zealous for the Lord to the point of killing the prophets of Baal. And then upon his Damascus Road conversion, found a new zeal for the Lord, zeal for people, and again his argument is saw that in Elijah in 1 Kings 19, where Elijah hears the still small voice of the Lord, and so why he went to Arabia was to go to Mount Sinai to experience that kind of the Lord like Elijah.
That's very, very interesting.
Isn't that? I
Yeah,
read
yeah.
that and I was like, I'm going to bring this up and see what. And this is. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is what N.T. Wright wrote. I don't know how I feel about this. I just read it and I was like, this is an interesting.
I immediately know how I feel about it. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, I mean, this is good.
He said, let me see. This is N.T. Wright. Like so many of Paul's deliberate intertextual echoes, it undergirds and gives added depth to the surface meaning of the text. On the surface, Paul is saying, and then he writes what he says, and he says, underneath this is the Elijah motif, and he's like paraphrasing what he thinks the underneath this is. I stood in the tradition of zeal going back to Phineas and Elijah, the tradition of the Maccabean martyrs so nobly exemplified. Indeed, my persecution of the church was inspired by exactly this tradition, but the God of Israel called me, like Elijah, to step back from this zeal and to listen to him afresh. When I listened, I heard a voice telling me that the messianic victory over evil had already been won, and that I and my fellow Jewish Christians were the true remnant, saved by grace and marked out by faith, apart from the ethnic identity and works of Torah. I therefore had to renounce my former zeal and announce the true Messiah to the world.
That's pretty fascinating. Okay, this is how I feel about that.
Yeah.
That's something I hope is true.
Yes.
It's so awesome.
That is the best way to put.
I hope that's right because it works so well.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
We have no way to verify.
Yeah, we can't. And I mean, that is kind of like, again, going back to last week, that Northern Galatian. Southern Galatian is kind of putting together some pieces that are there, and Northern Galatians is kind of putting pieces that aren't there. And
Correct.
That's where the argument comes from. So you're kind of arguing that, well, he says he goes to Arabia. Why would he go to Arabia when there's nothing really for him there other than Mount Sinai and this idea of, and there's more argument to it that he puts in there, but those are the highlights.
Sure.
And
the N.T. Wright is a very intelligent guy.
Is. My there's like a thing that people say on Twitter where like, it's like, ooh, big if true.
Yes.
Maybe like, that's huge news if it's real, if this is real. That's my first thought when I read this was like, big if true.
And
like,
it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It almost makes too much sense.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things where I go, man, I hope that's right. Because, I mean, I've never been to the Holy Lands, but I know several who have, and they talk about kind of an experience that you just can't have without having your feet on the same dirt that potentially Jesus did.
Yeah.
Right? Or being in the same spaces or seeing it with your own eyes. And so the Jewish journey is very much one of a sojourner, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you travel everywhere.
Really, yeah. All but one Abrahamic religion is one of sojourning.
Sure.
That's ours.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody else travels.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so the trip to Arabia fits.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's the point of everything we're saying. Then we get into 18 through 24, kind of that last paragraph for us. He gives us a few more kind of descriptors here. So then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas. Cephas is Peter.
Yeah.
So Cephas is his Aramaic name. Okay. Peter is, do we say Christian name? Because Jesus is the one that just, you're going to be this guy.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Well, it's the Greek Petros, which is, and they all mean the same thing. Simon, Cephas, and Peter.
Yeah.
So why?
Well, if I'm Peter, I'm going, call me Peter. Jesus called me Peter.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'll just say this quickly. There are early manuscripts that have it as Petros and not Cephas.
Right.
But that has
It doesn't change
matter
anything
at all. And so I'm just going
Right.
to say that and go.
I can see Paul calling him Cephas.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So to visit Cephas, he said he remained with him for 15 days. All right. So that was the first apostle that he saw. Because we get to 19, but I saw none of the other apostles except James. And then we're told James, the Lord's brother. All right. I think this demands a little bit of clarification on our end here. Okay. James, there's lots of different Jameses that are mentioned, especially in the New Testament and especially in the Gospels.
Yeah.
Okay. This particular James, he's called the Lord's brother because he would have been the half-brother of Jesus.
Yes.
All right. So we got to get a little biology here. All right. This to me is very interesting because I don't know how our Catholic friends would interpret all this. We call Mary a virgin because when she conceived Jesus, she was.
Yes.
Mary eventually got married and conceived other children that were not immaculate.
Yes.
Which would go on to say that she did not remain.
Yes. And
in her
that's
premarital state.
And that's where the Catholic
That's where
interpreters
I'm
would go, no, she's a virgin for life.
We know of at least 4 other kids that she and Joseph had, right? So Joseph, while he raised Jesus as his own son, was not his biological father.
Yeah.
All right. Joseph would have been the biological father of this James. Okay, so James at the time was the leader of the Jerusalem church.
Yeah.
I put Jerusalem Christian Church leader. Okay.
JCC.
JCC, there you go. So Acts 12:17, Acts 15:13 through 21, and Acts 21:18 through 25. All right. He is also the author of the epistle that we have that we call James.
Correct.
Okay. So which would have, by almost every account, would have been the earliest New Testament letter that we have. Writing to Hebrew Christians. Okay. We also have confirmation of James's death by Josephus in AD 62. All right, so and he was persecuted so he died because he was the leader of the Jerusalem church.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the James that he runs into in Jerusalem. So he has an encounter with top dog here, with the boss. Okay, so that's what's going on in 19. So James, the Lord's brother. And then verse 20. Now in ESV it's parenthetical, but he says, "In what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie." Now we as 2020 Americans would go, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's going, I swear to you this is true.
Yeah.
Right.
We trust you, Paul.
Okay.
We today are like, we got you, man.
This is very much an oath.
Yeah.
Though. All right, so this should be read as an oath. And if Paul is saying, I hope those who lead you astray are accursed, those who break an oath have some issues.
Yeah, that's a very Jewish law thing.
You have broken the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so goes hand in hand with people who are being told to be Judaizers, basically.
Yes.
Like,
yeah, exactly. On top of that, they probably can't just go and ask James, is this true?
yeah. Fair.
Yeah, and so there's no way to confirm it. You have to know that God is the one I am witnessing, that has witnessed this.
Yeah, this is God as my witness.
Yes. So yeah, this is the oath. All right. So then the rest of it. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. So Syria is here. Cilicia, come up here.
Fair to say he almost went home.
Almost went. Probably did.
Probably went home. That's what I was thinking.
Okay. So for those that can't see this very well, Tarsus is right here, and that's where he's from.
Yep.
All
Paul
right.
of Tarsus.
Saul
of Tarsus.
Yeah, Saul of Tarsus. Yeah, Paul of Tarsus, right? So he spends time in Syria and Cilicia, probably up in these regions. We also know that several times he was in Antioch, so that fits with any timeline that we might come up with. Verse 22, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea, where Jerusalem is. Okay, I was unknown to them. So you say, hey, Paul's preaching this gospel. Yeah, who's Paul? He was Saul, the guy that looked over Stephen.
Yeah, really violent guy.
Yeah,
hated
probably
everything.
may have dragged your wife and kids out of their house.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. He may have sent your husband to prison.
Yeah.
He also may have been taking letters to some other people to go do the same in other towns.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Verse 23. They only were hearing it said, he who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy. And verse 24, the reaction was, they glorified God because of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, the inclusio here, right? Why did they glorify God because of him? Because he was preaching the gospel. Go back to verse 6. I'm astonished that you so quickly are deserting him who called you to the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel.
Mm-hmm.
There's our inclusio.
Yeah.
Right? You fold that big section up and you go, okay, this whole thing is about the true gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, if you take that and you fold that up with the end of the letter, this whole letter is about Paul defending the gospel that he preached.
Yep.
And you are nuts if you leave it.
Mm-hmm.
If you accept that God is actually saying something different than what it is I have told you that I actually got from God, you be accursed.
Yeah.
You're going to be accursed.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
good
And
news
believe
and
me,
bad news.
I know. Believe me, I know, because I used to try to do that. I used to try to destroy this gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know it because God revealed it to me. And that's the only way I would have ever changed from who I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's where it was.
Yeah.
Kind of fun way to start that. And here's my favorite part about this, okay? As lit up as he was about this, right? As on fire as he was about this, he hasn't peaked yet. He speaks harsher as we go on.
Yeah, he keeps going. He's still building up.
Yeah. So every now and then when I'm picturing Paul writing his letters, or whoever it is writing, trying to keep up with him, whatever scribe is keeping up, I hear him spitting this, and the pen, I picture it smoking as he's writing it, because you have to get going with this.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, could you make the argument that he was, because this is the one that ends with "see what large letters I'm writing with."
Correct.
He was so mad. He was just like,
Yeah.
"Come
See how much of this precious reading parchment that I'm taking up?
It's because I need you to know this."
I want you to pay attention to this. Yeah.
Yikes.
Absolutely. So it'll be good moving forward.
Yeah.
And I hope we now see, and we made a point of saying this over and over, the difference between a true gospel and a false gospel is a movement from a zeal of law or rule to a zeal for people and their souls.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I'm not getting on my phone because I'm rude. I'm getting on my phone to see. I forget what next week is, and I want to make sure it's just 2, 1 through 10. I assume it is.
I believe it's 1 through 10.
You know what? I'm just going to say it because I can't find it that quickly. So that was CrossTalk. Ephesians. Great. Galatians 1, 6 through 24. Next week is Galatians.
There you
We're
go.
not going to Ephesians.
No.
We're going to Galatians 2. I believe it's 1 through 10, but it is on the website under the CrossTalk. It's still under COVID-19 updates. We might change that because these aren't really COVID-19 updates anymore.
Right.
But anyhow, either way, as always, if you have questions, comments, concerns about last week, 2 weeks ago, last week, this week, or next week. That's what I was trying to say.
There you go.
I'm all over the place.
Yeah.
Email me, samuelo@southrockchristian.com. He's nickp@southrockchristian.com. And I believe that's all we have. So we'll see you next week.
See ya.